Welcome to my presentation, Lock It and Still Lose It, on the insecurity of automotive remote keyless entry systems. My name is Daniel Alvarez, and I'll be your presenter. Credit where credit is due. This presentation is based on the publication titled Lock It and Still Lose It on the insecurity of automotive remote keyless entry system, and was presented on 25th Usenix Security Symposium in August of 2016 in Austin, Texas. The authors are outlined Flavio Garcia, Pierre Pavlidès, David Oswald from the University of Birmingham in the UK, and Timo Kasper from a consulting firm in Germany. I'd like to pose one single question to you. How secure are modern remote keyless entry systems? I sure didn't know before I put together this presentation. Let us find out. On the agenda in the presentation is our brief introduction, followed by a history on remote keyless entry systems. I'll give you an overview of what they are, what hardware they use, and how they work underneath. We will then go into the cryptography of those systems, and we'll walk through two case studies, one of the Volkswagen Group and one with a high-tech system. We'll go through the security challenges they pose, how they're solved, and we'll also find out if your car is affected by this. We'll see what remediations and countermeasures we can apply, and finally some closing remarks. A brief history of the keyless entry systems. They were first introduced in the 1980s in the form of keypads on the driver's side. They're mainly created from comfort and security, but they weren't always the most secured. Remote keyless systems rely on radio frequency signals. There's a slight different variation, which is called passive keyless entry and start systems. So they are most common in luxury brands. They're talking about smart keys here, and they rely on bidirectional communications as opposed to other RKEs, which rely on unidirectional signals. A quick review of the remote keyless entry systems shows that RF signals are sent when buttons are pressed. These signals mainly contain identification information as well as the command to be performed, whether it be locked, unlock, panic, alarm, etc. Remote range can vary from a few tens to hundreds of meters, and most used bandwidth frequencies are in the 350 MHz in the USA and other frequencies in the European Union. What about the hardware involved in performing attacks on remote keyless entry systems? They're fairly inexpensive and available from major retailers. You will have to put together the components, of course. They're also available in the black market. Its core components are software-defined radios, such as the ones outlined in the list, as well as RF modules. The picture on the right contains a module put together by the researchers in this paper. As far as the cryptography of the systems goes, initially they didn't have any at all. All was sent in clear text, and a constant or fixed code was used to identify the vehicle to its particular remote. Following generations started using rolling codes, which combine cryptography with a counter value, which is then increased with each button press, thus preventing replay attacks. A car then decrypts the signals and checks for the validity of the counter by comparing to the last valid stored value. It ultimately opens the car. Some additional things to look at as far as cryptography goes. This study reveals that the modulation most commonly used is the amplitude shift keying, and the smaller percentage is frequency shift keying. The encoding will mainly be Manchester encoding with bit rates between 1 kilobit and 20 kilobits per second. The encryption would mainly be symmetric authentication of payload, and in some cases there would be some message authentication code. Additional info utilized to perform an assessment of the technology was not always easy to find. In the case of the Volkswagen Group, it wasn't available, and one-page data sheets with component high-level specifications were provided in other cases. It would be useful to understand the packet structure of what's being sent from the remote to the receiver in the car. There's multiple sections, although different versions may vary slightly. This is mainly what a message would look like. The preamble is a regular binary sequence. The start pattern is a sequence of one or a few fixed bytes. The cryptography data payload contains multiple things: a unique identifier, the rolling counter value, and the action. The checksum will be appended at the end for message integrity. It would be useful to review what attacks are possible on remote keyless entry systems. Early systems didn't use any cryptography, so they could be hacked by just capturing the signal and replaying it, because it was in plain text. More complex systems that followed used rolling codes. They are still cryptographically vulnerable and can be broken by side channel attacks on the key derivation tasks executed by the receiver. PKEs, or smart keys, are also vulnerable to relay attacks. Another way to look at it would be signal jamming. You could also deny a user from using the remote by jamming the signal to the car, thus preventing the user from executing any actions on the vehicle remotely. And last but not least, reverse engineering of firmware and code on the microcontroller or the electronic control unit in the car could lead to revelation of how the cryptography system is put together, thus allowing you to unlock the vehicle. Could allow you to unlock other cars if keys were being shared, which, as we will see, that is the case. There are many security challenges at the Volkswagen Group. For instance, they store the same global master key regardless of vehicles or remote control in millions of electronic control units, with very little key diversification. These master keys can be extracted from the ECU's firmware or from the microcontroller in the remote control by using microprobing or side channel attacks. Microprobing technology was not available to the researchers in this presentation. With the knowledge of this key, an adversary needs only to capture one signal so that it can mimic a control remote and thus be able to open multiple cars. In some versions of the Volkswagen system, sending the wrong signal would actually lock the remote, thus rendering invalid until it's resynchronized again with the car. This could be exploited in a denial of service attacks, which could be massive if you think of doing this to a Volkswagen dealership, for instance. Over time, the Volkswagen Group has made security improvements to its remote keyless entry systems, but had not yet properly addressed the key distribution problem until very recently. Only most recent cars display newer technology that have unique keys. They now acknowledge that individual keys are distributed with each vehicle, which mitigates the risk of compromising keys and being able to unlock large numbers of vehicles. We'll now switch gears to the HiTag 2 system and examine what security challenge it has. The HiTag 2 system is not specific to a particular manufacturer. Instead, multiple original equipment manufacturers, or OEM, use implementations of this system. The cipher it uses has been reverse engineered, but no practical attack had been developed prior to this research. A new attack, known as fast correlation attack in the paper, was developed, which needs between 4 and 8 rolling codes to succeed, but it's increasingly more accurate if it can collect more non-consecutive codes. Because multiple signals need to be captured, this attack is more difficult and may require more from the adversaries. Either they will have to spend more time collecting signals or combine this attack with the jamming attack, so that the user thinks there's something wrong with the remote, thus keep pressing keys until the attacker collects enough signals for him to be able to unlock the car. In looking at key differences between the two case studies, the Volkswagen Group and the HiTag 2 system, we can see that the main weakness of the remote keyless entry system on the Volkswagen Group lies in the key distribution method. Once this key is reverse engineered, you can use that same master key to unlock multiple, large numbers of vehicles. On the opposite side, the weakness of the HITAC2 system is not a key distribution, it's a cryptographic vulnerability. The attacker can collect a minimum of 4 signals and he can start guessing 16 bits at a time until he reverse engineers the complete cipher, thus breaking the code and enable him access to a vehicle. A few things worth noting about the research. This was not an exhaustive or comprehensive list of every vehicle for every model produced by the Volkswagen Group. Instead, they had to rely on volunteering friends, family, and their own vehicles. They also focused on systems that were most common and are most likely to be more widely deployed. Also some that are used by different car manufacturers, such as Ford and its Galaxy model, that too carry the same basic RKE technology. A question you may have had all along is my car affected? Is someone in my family going to have a car that has these vulnerabilities? It's quite possible because the list is pretty pervasive. Granted that the study was conducted in Europe, some of these brands may not be recognizable to you, like the bottom 2. But the top 2, they most definitely are. They have a large presence in the United States. It is quite likely you either own or may know someone that owns one of these cars. While the previous slide contained the Volkswagen Group tested models, this one are for the HITAC2 system. Basically any car that supports aftermarket universal remote, and that remote implements a HITAC2 remote keyless entry system, could also technically be affected by the vulnerabilities we discussed. This is also not a comprehensive list. Instead, it is a list that was tested from the cars that were available to the researchers. To give you a concrete example, some Mercedes-Benz built around the 2000 still have no cryptography on their signals. I did a quick search online and found there was 811 Mercedes-Benz for sales on AutoTrader, a local company to the Atlanta area. In addition, the only technology exposed to this vulnerability are not just those strictly to control remotes. Garage control remotes also have some of those vulnerabilities, such as the key lock system. So what can we do to prevent it? How do we stop hackers, malicious people, from stealing our car from our own driveway without making any noise, potentially using our own keys? The reality is that due to the high cost of replacing every unit and or upgrading the firmware of all affected vehicles for the Volkswagen Group, car keys are not likely to get an update. Instead, they focus their efforts in updating new systems so they're more secure. As a consumer, that's not necessarily good news. That's definitely not what you want to hear. So you're basically left, if you have a car that has this issue, with 2 impractical solutions. Either lock the car using the locking button every time, or you can just go ahead and disable the remote control. Thank you, Volkswagen Group. I really appreciate that. We posted earlier the question, how secure are modern remote keyless entry systems? It turns out, not secure at all. For over 20 years, systems with subpar security have been deployed so widely to make large-scale attacks possible. So what do we do about it? What is within our reach? How do we make things better? The reality is that there's not a widespread of these attacks. It's not a crisis. In fact, there's been some mysterious reports about car thefts under specific conditions, like the one in the link. But there's not really a significant scale. In fact, car thefts in the US have been going down for years. In conclusion, remote keyless entry systems can and should be much more secure than they have been for the past 2 decades. A combination of a secure key distribution, along with strong cryptographic algorithms, leads to the creation of more secure systems. New standards have already been designed and critiqued. So what's next? Manufacturers should include these better systems we already know of into newer vehicles. And granted, they are making progress to improve their security. As an educated user now, you now have the knowledge to make a more informed decision next time you buy a car. Now you know you can search for systems that are vulnerable to specific kinds of attacks. Only one thing is left for me to say. I want to thank you for your time. Happy to answer your questions. Have a great day.